Hi everyone. Welcome to the Baxter Center Teacher Virtual Learning Series. We're excited to start our 5th week of the series with Design Thinking with Mockups. I'm Natalie Bueno. I'm the Program and Partnership Coordinator with Round Lake Area Schools in the Greater Lake County area. And I'm excited to introduce Kristen Perkins. So she is a former CPS teacher and is currently the ETHS Northwestern Partnership Coordinator. This is housed within the Office of Community Education Partnerships at Northwestern University. So thank you, Kristen, for joining us. And after this video, we hope you can join us tomorrow, Thursday, May 7th, from 2 to 2:45 p.m. for a teacher meetup where we get to go over this activity and just talk about how we can bring this back to our students virtually and in person. So thanks. And I'll hand it off to Kristen to get things started.
Yeah, thanks, Natalie, for having me. So this week we're going to talk about design thinking as a framework that we use, to encourage critical thinking skills as a way of problem solving. And we're going to use this activity called Mockups that was developed at the Delta Lab at Northwestern. And the Delta Lab is part of McCormick School of Engineering. And it's within the Siegel Design Institute at Northwestern. So really focused on human-centered design and problem solving in the world. It's led by Professor Liz Gerber. And Professor Gerber and her team developed this game, Mockups, as something that they can use within their team as a quick activity. But mockups quickly became something that was really interesting and clearly could be used in lots of different settings with lots of different participants. So the idea behind mockups is that you get this really quick problem that is interesting and creative and really pushes you as a team to brainstorm quickly, come up with lots of different solutions, and really think outside of the box. And it's interesting to hear Professor Gerber talk about why they developed mockups as a game. And they developed it because, the Delta Lab is situated within McCormick School of Engineering, within Northwestern University, which is a top-tier institution that pulls some of the top students for undergrads who come here to study engineering from all over the country and all over the world. And they're really good at, taking tests, getting those top scores in math and science. But the School of Engineering and Siegel Design Institute in particular is really focused on thinking about our next generation of scientists and engineers. And we need not just left brain linear thinkers, but we also need students who can embrace the right brain, creativity and problem solving, thinking outside of the box, being willing to be collaborative, to take risks and to fail forward. And so mockups is this really quick activity that encapsulates all of these things where you can introduce design thinking to students and kids and families and parents. We'll talk a little bit later on about different ways that we've used that, but it also has this framework overall of, how do we think about problem solving in general, and allows us to introduce those different concepts. So Natalie's going to talk a little bit more about the Mockups game and how it's played, and then we'll talk about some different ways that we've used it.
Mockups is a really fun game that I've got to use with students and friends. So how it looks, it's actually just a card deck, and you get 3 different categories. And they're labeled as a user, a design task, and constraint. So we have an example here on this PowerPoint. So our user would be our superheroes, where we would want to empathize with our user and really put put ourselves into their shoes. We have our design task, and that could be to make water clean. And we have our constraint, like we normally would encounter in everyday projects. That'd be to use nanotechnology. So if I was with a group of students and I selected a card from each of these categories, I would have we would want to appeal to our superheroes to make clean water and to use nanotechnology while doing so. So it's a really fun game. We develop prototypes through a design thinking process that Kristen will go over shortly. But this card game is available on Amazon. Yeah.
And so to take a step back and to go meta for a minute, we use mockups as a way to think about as a way to introduce design thinking. And design thinking is a methodology for problem solving. And it sort of takes us through step by step. So it's sort of analogous to the scientific method that science teachers are used to using, in the same way that we know that scientific method is actually really cyclical in real life. So in design thinking, when we put out the steps in this way, this graphic that's here on this slide was pulled from Stanford's D School. It looks like a linear process, but in actuality, we know that it's really cyclical. Stanford's D School, the website is there. They have a lot of resources, particularly for K-12 educators. And it's really interesting to take a look at their site and look at some of the resources that they have. Just really quickly, if we think about mapping mockups on top of the design thinking framework, the first card that you get is that user. Who is it that needs your help as a design team? And so we think about that as the empathize phase. The next stage, define, when you really want to clearly define the problem that you're working with. So in this case, what does it mean to make clean water? What does that, and you have to really quickly, as a design team, think about what are the boundaries of that problem? Ideate, that's the heart of this activity that we do when we brainstorm with your team about as many different ways, as many different solutions as you can come up with to solve that problem. When we do this, we oftentimes will have teams make a lo-fi prototype to be able to demonstrate. They start by just brainstorming on sticky notes or writing ideas down, and then you can use everyday household items to make a lo-fi prototype of your design. And then we often have like a testing phase to what are the next iterations? How do you continue to improve upon your design after you share it with other people, after you test it out, after you show it to your user in ideal settings? So I think the last thing that I want to say about design thinking right now in this moment is that the D School is in their next iteration of thinking about design thinking and its use in classrooms and lots of different settings, is that they have a team of folks that are looking at design thinking from an equity lens. And so mapping things like reflection points into different places in design thinking. Also, as a design team, how do you wrap your head around the limits of your lens that you bring to the table as designers? And how do you think about equity with respect to design thinking? So there's some really interesting work being done out of the D School in that space. And you can check that out. I would encourage you. We'll talk a little bit more about that in the Thursday session as well.
Great. Thank you, Kristen. So I thought it would be fun to go over some of our favorite moments that we've had with people when we have done mock-ups. So to get things started, one of my favorite moments happened last year. I had a really fun time at youth conference in the Lake County area, and we got to implement design thinking with mock-ups. And so I worked with 3 different groups. The first group was with middle schoolers. The second group was with freshmen and sophomores, and the third group was with juniors and seniors. So I actually got to work with those student groups in that order. And when we went over this process, it was interesting to see what different prototypes they made. What I found was that as the students got older, the prototypes that they were making actually reflected a lot of what was already available in the real world. So I thought it was interesting to see that process and their products and how that really turned out. So when I have done this, I actually have found that the younger students have a tendency to be more creative in the prototypes they make, which is a lot of fun. So I think even working with elementary school students have been some of my favorite moments when working with mockups. Are you, Kristen?
Yeah, I love doing this activity. Every time it's a little bit different, and it's always really fun. But I've seen some of the same trends that you've seen, Natalie, where younger students are just less constrained by the world. And everyone, I've used this from kindergarten students were the youngest at a STEM fest where kindergarten students were in a workshop with their parents doing this, all the way up to working with Illinois Science Technology Institute and having some doing a mentor training for mentors from corporations around the Chicagoland area. So we had CEOs, we had engineers, we had corporate attorneys all in the room engaging with mock-ups. And so it's always really interesting to see. But kids will inevitably just move more quickly and be willing to get more creative and silly and fun, which actually leads to more interesting, better designs for these problems. Every team, when they get those first 3 cards, after they, turn them over or pull them out of the deck, their first reaction is, oh my God, this is impossible. This doesn't make any sense. I don't know how to move. I don't know how to solve this problem. And, we, again, just going back to that meta discussion that you can have, is that we need our next generation of scientists and engineers to be able to move past that hurdle really quickly. Because, when they encounter a problem in their work and in the world, we need design teams to say, okay, this problem, we have that initial reaction of this is too big, or this is too complicated, or there are too many constraints, or this doesn't make any sense, or this is impossible. And then we need them to very quickly move through that. And I found that younger students, have a much easier time doing that. It's interesting to do this with kids and parents together. I've done this, led this activity in talking about STEAM and diversity in STEM education with PTAs at a couple of different schools, and had the parents and students do these together. And kids will nudge their parents in ways that are really creative and fun. This picture comes from a teacher training that we did at the Baxter Symposium in 2018. And there were some really creative solutions. I think there was a train that was covered in mushrooms. I think someone used, to make a lo-fi prototype. There was somebody whose prototype ended up with pantyhose on their head, as part of their design. And it's really fun to see teachers engage, to laugh, to be able to lean into this work too. It's a lot of fun.
Great. So thanks for sharing, Kristen. If you're interested in seeing how mockup works, and you would like the opportunity to talk about it with other teachers in the area, we hope you can join us at the Baxter Center Teacher Meetup tomorrow, Thursday, May 7th, from 2 to 2:45 p.m. We hope you can use this space to talk about the activity and how you can bring it back to your students, talk about what constraints you might encounter and how you can work through those with your students. So if you're interested in joining, please visit our website with more connection information. So thank you for watching our video. If you have any questions, feel free to reach us at bcsc@northwestern.edu or visit our website. And thank you all for watching, and thank you, Kristen, for joining us this week.
Thank you for having me, Natalie. We hope to see everyone on the call on Thursday. We're going to go through an iteration of mock-ups in a remote environment, and then ideate with you teachers about different ways that you might be able to use this with your students as well.